All right, class. The book of Lamentations, which we'll look at in this recording session, is complementary to Jeremiah, the prophet, and what he wrote. He also wrote Lamentations, and he is lamenting here in this book the destruction of Jerusalem, God judging the southern kingdom of Judah. And he's referred to as the weeping prophet. The prophet Jeremiah wrote the book, both of the book of Jeremiah and of Lamentations. The book of Jeremiah may be classified as a book of warning, while the book of Lamentations can be classified as a book of mourning. Warning and mourning, because he warned them about the coming judgment of God. In the Septuagint, that's LXX, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew of Old Testament. It was translated into Greek around 250 years BC. The book of Lamentation is referred to as the tears of Jeremiah. So in that Greek translation, it's referred to as the tears of Jeremiah. And here we look at the fall of Jerusalem in 586 by Nebuchadnezzar and his armies. A description of the fall of Jerusalem is provided in the 52nd chapter of Jeremiah. And also in 2 Kings 25. Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem 3 times. There were 3 deportations. And we listed them on the timeline back when we looked at Jeremiah when we were studying that book. But 605 BC, 597 BC, and 586. And so, here they are. And the final, before it finally fell in 586, they were actually under siege and surrounded there from 588 to 586. There was a 2.5-year siege of Jerusalem before its ultimate and devastating destruction. A great famine occurred during this period of time. He burnt the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burnt he with fire. He's referring to the Chaldeans and their army and Nebuchadnezzar. And we see that's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 25. And here we see in this slide a description of the fall of Jerusalem. By August, this is from the Dyer and Merrill's Old Testament Explorer, where they made this comment. We see by August the 17th, so they know specifically the date, 586 BC, the city of Jerusalem had been cleared of rebels, sacked, and put to the torch. Every major building was burned down. Those who survived the siege were taken into exile, and only the poorest people were left behind. Just as Jeremiah had predicted, the furnishings still remaining in the temple were taken to Babylon. The bronze pillars, the movable stands, and other furnishings named by Jeremiah were carried off to Babylon. All the city's leaders, including the chief priest and several other key temple officials, were rounded up by the Babylonians. Also captured were the officer in charge of the fighting men. I guess we would call it today in our country the Secretary of Defense. 7 royal advisors and the officer who was in charge of conscripting the people, along with several of his men. These were taken to Nebuchadnezzar and executed. And so, as we read here a description of some of the things that happened at that time on August the 17th, 586, you'll also see listed in there, let me get my little I should have gotten it already. Laser thing here. Only the poorest people were left behind, those who were no threat to the Babylonians. And this was all predicted in the book of Jeremiah. And the furnishings that hadn't been taken out of the temple the remaining were taken back to Babylon. Now, if you remember when we studied Isaiah and those chapters about King Hezekiah, over 100 years before this happened, he showed those who were there visiting. This was before, that was 100 years earlier. Babylon was not the major power of that world at the time. It was the Assyrians, but they were concerned about. But Babylon came down, and he showed all the gold and silver and goblets and all the things in the temple. And here they took everything, and they took them right back to Babylon. And if you study Daniel in chapter 5, where they were having a drunken feast, and by this time Nebuchadnezzar had died. I think his grandson was now in charge, and they were having a drunken feast, and a handwriting appeared on the wall and say, "This day you've been weighed in the balances and found lacking, and God would judge you." And that night, Darius the Mede, they had dammed up the river that flowed through under the walls, and went through under the walls and conquered them. What were they doing in that drunken feast? Using and profaning these vessels that were set apart to worship in the temple in Jerusalem. They were using those and mocking God, the God of the Jews, in that drunken feast in Daniel 5 that they had taken, that we're reading about right here. The furnishings still remaining were taken to Babylon. The bronze pillars, the movable stand, other furnishings named by. And so I just wanted to point that out. And of course, Hezekiah was, God had Isaiah to call down Hezekiah. You shouldn't have done that. Now here we see here, looks like a modern picture of the Wailing Wall, where the temple, what's remaining of the temple today, and tourists go there, and many of the Orthodox Jewish priests of the day would go to the wall and do their prayers, and even people would go and stick in the in between the mortar and the bricks and put written prayers. But this is done with a rock here. Behind it, this is a mosque in this gold. That's a Muslim mosque right next to it on Mount Zion. This is Mount Zion. This is where the temple was, what's left of it in modern times. So I put that picture up there because all these things were taken out of the temple back in the days when it was destroyed, and the vessels were taken. Here we see a map, and it's really has to do with the fall of Jerusalem. The fall of Judah was the fall of Jerusalem as well, one and the same. It was the capital city of the southern kingdom, and where the temple was located. But you see here, the kings of the time, Zedekiah was blinded, some captives killed at the Babylonian headquarters here, right there, and when they came down. Deportation point was right here, Ramah. The Zedekiah captured after attempting to flee, right here. See, here's Jerusalem, here's Jericho. See, Jericho's right down here in the valley. It's below sea level. And here we have Jerusalem. I always say you go up to Jerusalem. Going from Jericho to Jerusalem, you would have to go up because Jericho's below sea level. It's over way down here. August 587, Jerusalem was burned, and we'll see. And outlying cities captured. The siege of Jerusalem began in January 588, and so it siege means it was surrounded, and so they were basically starving. They couldn't get out because they were surrounded. So anyway, the siege of Jerusalem interrupted as army goes south to fight Egyptians in the summer of 5. So that's why it didn't happen all at once, but it was surrounded. And so raids into Judah, see right here. They also went into the countryside. And so all these things were happening in that period between 588 and 586. Now, let's look at this map. This is kind of gives you a look at the what the city of Jerusalem looked like after I guess the ruin of the original wall is here, and here we see other things. The original wall was ruined. The north and northwest extent of the city is over here. So here we see the Kidron Valley is to the east of the city of David is Jerusalem right here. The Kidron Valley, see this is Mount Zion up here, where the temple is up here. This is Mount Zion, and the altar there. And Solomon's palace and government buildings are up here when Solomon was the king. And so we see, kind of get an idea of what the city was like. Here we got the King's Garden might have been here. It's got a question mark by it. The upper pool of Shiloh, the lower pool here. Hezekiah's aqueduct is there. Here we got the Valley of the Dung Gate. They have a refuse where garbage where they would burn in Hinnom, which is right outside the city. And so that gives you an idea of, they had that under siege when the Babylonian armies surrounded it for a couple of years. Who is the author? Well, I've already explained it was the author of Lamentations is Jeremiah, and he's referred to as the weeping prophet. But both internal within Scripture and external evidence outside of Scripture point to Jeremiah as the author of Lamentations. External evidence is the Septuagint, which was basically a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. The Talmud, which is writings of the rabbis, Aramaic Targum of Jonathan. Early church fathers such as Origen and Jerome ascribe authorship to Jeremiah. That's in New Testament times. So I think Origen lived in the 3rd century, 2nd and 3rd, and Jerome maybe in the 3rd or 4th century AD. So all this is external. Internal, though, the author was an eyewitness to the fall of Jerusalem. So we see Jeremiah records in his prophecy and also in the Lamentation that who the author was. He was an eyewitness. He was there. We have the phrase "daughter of" in this in Lamentation. It occurs 20 times in each book. So this is kind of unique to Jeremiah in his writings, and he wrote the prophecy that we have in Jeremiah, and he also wrote Lamentations using the same phrase, "daughter of." So it's his style. Jeremiah is connected with this type of literature as well. That is, the type of literature here is Lamentations. It's a book of dirges, and he's lamenting what's happened to his people and the temple and the city of Jerusalem. And so 2nd Chronicles, which is thought to be written by Ezra, I believe, attests that Jeremiah was connected with Lamentations and this kind of literature. Also, we read that. We can read it. 2 Chronicles 35:25 tells us, it says, "Then Jeremiah," he mentions him by name, he's connected to it, "chanted a lament, for Josiah," who was a previous only the last good king of the southern kingdom. He had a lament for Josiah and all that. He died, of course, before the God judged the city. But he lamented for Josiah, and all the male and female singers speak about Josiah in their lamentations. He uses that's why he's connected to Lamentations to this day. And this is what I think it was Ezra wrote Chronicles. And so that's, we're talking about quite a long time after this happened. If it happened 586 and then Ezra writes maybe 100 years later. And they maybe more than 100. And they made them an ordinance in Israel. Behold, they are also written in the Lamentations. So we see he has the Lamentations that Jeremiah wrote, and he mentions that here, that it's written in Lamentations, and he mentions the prophet Jeremiah in the same verse. So you see the connection and the link. Here we have a possible date of writing. We see in your textbook, Paul Benware, page 183, I pulled it out. It says, in light of the sequence of events found in 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah 40 through 44, it's likely that Jeremiah penned the book at Mizpah in 586. Now, I wonder, I got a textbook right here. This might have been what your textbook is, a revised edition. Let me look here real quick and see if that page number lines up with your textbook. I might need to revise my PowerPoints. 183 here. And let me look real quick. It may be the same because this is connected to Lamentations, so it looks like it is. So I'm glad to know that it may be accurate. Let's look at the next slide. Structure of the book of Lamentations. Let's look how Jeremiah structured his writing. Lamentation consists of 5 funeral dirges lamenting the fall of the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was very dear to a pious Israelite, and if you read Psalms 137, you can see how a pious Israelite would feel about their city. Much of Lamentations is arranged acrostically. This means that the passage is arranged according to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Chapter 1, 2, and 4 all have 22 verses. And the first word of each of the sentences begin with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Chapter 3 had 66 verses. Chapters 1 through 4 are also written in what is called limping meter, a cadence used in funeral dirges. Chapter 5 has 22 sentences, but it is not arranged acrostically. Let me put this down here. Dr. Bowman's class notes. So we got this good information from when Dr. Bowman taught this class many years ago here at our school. The heart of the prophet is revealed in Lamentations. So we can see Jeremiah personally, his emotions as he was writing this. Especially in these verses 1:16, 2:11, and chapter 3 especially. Here we see, look at 2:11. Jeremiah writes, "My eyes fail because of tears. My spirit is greatly troubled. My heart is poured out on the earth because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, when little ones and infants faint in the streets of the city." So you see, he said he refers to, that's why he's referred to as a weeping prophet. what he sees is brings him to tears. He's truly saddened by their destruction and what the Babylonians did to them. He identifies with his people in chapter 3, verse 25, and we see in verse 24, the Lord, and 24, 25, and 26, the Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I have hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. It is good that he waits silently for the salvation of the Lord. So he identifies with his people, and he says, he's praising God here. He says, God is still my portion. He judged us, but we're not. Our faith is still in him. And he's good to those who wait, to those who seek him. And that's what he is. And he's trying to identify with his people. We need to seek the Lord because we have sinned. His prayer in 3:55 and through 66. 55 through 56 and 7 read this way. I called on your name, O Lord, out of the lowest pit. You have heard my voice. Do not hide your ear from my prayer for relief. See, he's praying for relief. For my cry for help. You drew near when I called on you. You said, do not fear. So we see the Lord was communicating with Jeremiah. He was crying for help and identifying with his people for relief and for help. And his response he received back was, don't fear. Don't fear. God's in control. He was judging his people for their sin. And all of this, God was what? Jeremiah's encouragement. Look at these verses. Chapter 3, verses 22 and 23. The Lord's loving kindness, that word in Hebrew is kindness, is plural, is hesed. And this in English is translated loving kindness, which means God is faithful to keep his covenant he made with them. I will be your God, you will be my people, even though he judged them for their sin, for breaking the covenant. The Lord's loving kindness indeed never ceases. He's encouraging. That's what Jeremiah is writing here. For his compassion never fails. They are new every morning. Lord's compassion. Great is your faithfulness. See that connection, loving kindness is hesed. God is a covenant-keeping God. He is faithful. Who was not faithful? It was his people who sinned and didn't keep the covenant. They were not faithful, and so he judged them. The outline of the book of Lamentations. The first chapter, verses 1 through 22, is the first dirge, and it is the destruction of Jerusalem. We see the lament of the remnant, those who were left behind, the poor, and those who were not threatening. Her request for others to observe her condition, that is Jerusalem. Look what God has done to me through the Babylonians. The plea for Jehovah to avenge her. The city of Jerusalem is personified as a person and speaks as a person in lament in these verses. And then we just see the next part of the outline, the judgment of Jehovah upon Jerusalem. This is the second dirge. It is Jehovah's anger with his people who had sinned and broke the covenant. His depiction of the judgment. The bewailing of the judgment. Jerusalem's cry unto Jehovah after he has judged them. We'll continue to look at the outline. Jeremiah bewails their suffering. We see in chapter 3. This is the third dirge. It's the mercy of Jehovah. Because Jehovah personally caused this suffering. God was judging his people. It was not just a happenstance. He was using, we saw Habakkuk predicted this as we studied that book, and it only happened 2 years after, because Habakkuk wrote in 607 BC, and the very first attempt to invade was in 605. and they took captives, Daniel being one of them, in 605, and took them back to Babylon. Secondly, because Jehovah is righteous in doing it, and because Israel should repent and turn back to Jehovah. And so we see, I need here things I need to correct. I guess I can do that. All right, I do it afterwards. Jodas, that B and C up there doesn't belong. It was I replaced it with bullets, but I should have got rid of the B and C. Well, it used to be A, B, and C. Judah's suffering is a result of sin. In chapter 4, this is the fourth dirge. So I got ahead of myself, but that's because of their sin. They broke the covenant. They pretty much everything in it. And most importantly, they worshipped idols. So we see the discomfort of the suffering here in this fourth dirge. The cause of the suffering, it was their sin. That's why God judged them and allowed the Babylonians to do what they did. The lack of human aid in the suffering. So it was severe. To put it mildly, it was severe. That's much worse than I could even describe. You read the book, you'll see much more detail. We see here the first, a recapitulation of the first dirge. In chapter 5, Jehovah is admonished to look at their reproaches, that is the Jews, and plead for mercy based upon previous. God had been merciful to them in the past, so they're asking him to have mercy on them now. And so that's what they were pleading for. Here are some outstanding themes in this book of Lamentations. Sin was always the reason God judged them, and we see in verses 5 and 8 in chapter 1, therefore, that's the reason, the fault was their own. We see verse 5, her adversaries have become her masters. That's the Babylonians. Her enemies prosper. For the Lord, because the Lord has caused her grief, because of the multitude of her transgressions, that is Judah, the southern kingdom, Jerusalem being the capital there. Her little ones have gone away as captives before the adversary. So anybody who was as a threat, a young person like Daniel, Ezekiel, others were taken captive. They would have been a threat to have left them there. The one who was doing the punishing was ultimately God himself. He used the Babylonians to do it. The Lord has rejected all my strong men in my midst. He has called an appointed time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter. Here we see that phrase that we see Jeremiah uses, not only in Lamentation, but also in his prophecy, the daughter of Jerusalem. The awful consequences of sin is the backdrop of God's holiness. God is holy. He's absolutely holy. He doesn't tolerate anything that's not holy. And they were not holy because they didn't keep their end of the deal and the covenant. They went to worshiping idols. They pretty much broke all the other things: murder, stealing, adultery, you name it. The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his command. Hear now, O peoples, and behold, look at my pain. My virgins and my young men have gone into captivity. So anybody that was a threat, they took them back to Babylon. The ultimate source of help is to be found only in the Lord. You see all those references. Look at verse 22 of chapter 3. The Lord's loving kindness says, we read that earlier, that's that hesed, Hebrew word, that God's faithful to keep his covenant. He judged them, but he hasn't forgotten his unconditional promises to Abraham and to the descendants, the Jews. The Lord's loving kindness is indeed never ceased, for his compassions never fail, even though he judged them. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. We have a hymn in our hymn book. Great is your faithfulness, do we not? The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I have hope in him. Keep hoping in him even when he disciplines you. That's what he's saying. Here's some outstanding themes here, continued. The spiritual leadership delivered the wrong message at the wrong time. And it was they had false prophets, and they didn't listen to the true ones like Jeremiah. They false prophets gave a message of peace and prosperity, but they were actually fixing to be judged of God because of their sin. Look at verse 14. Jeremiah writes, "Your prophets have seen," what the seers, what their prophets and what they say, they claim they saw for you false and foolish visions. False visions, see, they were false prophets. And they have not exposed your sin, iniquity, so as to restore you from captivity. So you are going into captivity because of your sin. But they have seen for you false and misleading, second time, it's repeating, false and misleading oracles. That's of the devil. Devil is liar. Devil is the one who misleads. And these false prophets were used of the devil to influence the people of that day. And they did not repent of their sin, and God certainly disciplined them and judged them. God is holy and just, therefore he will execute judgment. Here it is. The Lord has done what he purposed. He has accomplished his word, which he commanded from days of old. He has thrown down without sparing. He has caused the enemy to rejoice over you. He has exalted the might of your adversaries. And so we see this was of God. He's holy and just, and his people were not, so he judged them. So that's how we will end this this study of the book of Lamentations.